You're 32, still living at home or bouncing between apartments. Your career feels provisional, like you're waiting for your real life to start. Relationships never quite work out. The right woman hasn't come along yet, or they all want too much too soon. You tell yourself you're just figuring things out, but somewhere deep down you know the truth. You're stuck in permanent adolescence, and it's costing you everything. This isn't about laziness or failure. This is about a specific psychological pattern Carl Jung called the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. And it's become the defining crisis of American masculinity. 1 in 4 children now grows up without a father. 15% of men report having 0 close friends, up from 3% in 1990. The median age for first marriage has climbed to 28 for men, and demographers predict 1 in 3 will never marry by 45. Meanwhile, 85% of young men in prison came from fatherless homes, and male suicide rates stand at 4 times that of women. We're not talking about a few lost souls. This is an epidemic affecting millions of men who are living decades below their potential, unable to form lasting bonds, haunted by a gnawing sense that life is passing them by. The Puer Aeternus doesn't happen by accident. It emerges from specific, identifiable psychological wounds, exacerbated by cultural collapse. And while the pattern is devastating, it's not permanent. Jung and his followers mapped out the psychology of male maturation in extraordinary detail, and modern neuroscience has confirmed what they intuited. With the right understanding and practices, men can break free from the eternal boy pattern and step into genuine maturity. But it requires brutal honesty about what's actually happening beneath the surface. Here's what they don't teach you in school. The male prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and understanding consequences, doesn't fully mature until age 25 to 27. During this critical window, you're biologically vulnerable to pattern formation. When that vulnerability intersects with supernormal stimuli like pornography, video gaming, and social media, you're essentially rewiring your reward system to prefer fantasy over reality. The neuroscience is stark. Research from the Max Planck Institute found that higher pornography use correlates with reduced gray matter in reward circuitry and decreased brain activation in response to conventional imagery. Translation: your brain requires progressively more extreme stimulation to feel anything, just like a drug addict building tolerance. Gaming shows similar patterns. fMRI studies reveal changes in attention, impulse control, and emotional regulation regions identical to those seen in substance addiction. Both hijack the same dopamine pathways, creating what researchers call hypofrontality, a juvenile brain state where the prefrontal cortex loses its ability to regulate impulses. Add this to the statistics. 67% of American men view pornography annually, with 44% watching in the past month. Video game addiction affects 3 to 4% of all gamers, with men comprising nearly 63% of addicts. The average gaming addict is 24 years old, right in that developmental window. These aren't recreational habits, they're neurological patterns that prevent the transition to mature masculine psychology. You're getting a dopamine hit that exceeds 250% of baseline and sustains for hours. Training your brain that real-world achievement, which requires sustained effort and delayed gratification, isn't worth pursuing. The cruel irony? Your brain remains neuroplastic throughout life. It can change, but it requires you to stop feeding the beast and start doing the hard work of reality-based growth. Neurogenesis, synaptic remodeling, functional reorganization, all remain possible in adulthood, but only through consistent, challenging practice that your comfort-addicted nervous system will resist with everything it has. Jung was obsessed with the mother complex in men because he recognized it as the primary driver of the Puer Aeternus condition. When mother becomes overly involved, often compensating for an absent or weak father, the boy never psychologically separates from her protective sphere. He remains caught, sucked in, enveloped, and devoured, as Jung wrote. Not literally, but psychologically. His entire heterosexuality gets tied to her unconsciously, manifesting as either Don Juanism, unconsciously seeking mother in every woman, or its opposite, complete withdrawal from women altogether. The statistics paint a brutal picture. 18.3 million American children live without a father in the home, nearly 1 in 4. Research shows only 17% of American men reported positive relationships with their fathers during youth. The consequences cascade: 71% of high school dropouts, 85% of imprisoned youth, and 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. These aren't just social problems, they're psychological wounds that shape male development at the neural level. Neuroscience is now validating what Jung intuited. Studies on prairie voles raised without fathers show fewer oxytocin-producing cells in crucial brain regions and measurably more anxiety and social dysfunction, effects reversed by directly injecting oxytocin into the prefrontal cortex. In humans, father absence during early childhood predicts sustained elevated depressive symptoms through young adulthood. The father isn't optional. He serves a specific developmental function that mothers cannot replicate, initiating the son into masculine reality, modeling male emotional regulation, and providing the aggression and boundary setting that teach boys how to handle conflict and competition. Without father, the son remains in mother's world, adapting to female value systems and relational modes, learning to suppress his testosterone-driven tendencies without healthy outlets. This creates the nice guy syndrome: passive, easily manipulated, unable to assert boundaries, and paradoxically rejected by women who sense his fundamental lack of masculine groundedness. He's been psychologically castrated, not by feminism but by the absence of masculine initiation. Every traditional culture understood something we've forgotten. Boys don't automatically become men. Manhood requires initiation, a clear, often brutal rite of passage that physically and psychologically separates the youth from childhood and mother, symbolically kills the boy, and births him into adult male community. Historically, this occurred around puberty and was conducted by elder males who had themselves been initiated. Modern America has precisely none of this. We've abolished rites of passage while maintaining the expectation that boys will somehow figure out manhood on their own. The result? Men remain psychologically stunted at premature development stages well into their 30s and beyond, lacking orienting purpose, struggling with accountability, chronically lazy and complacent, addicted to pornography, and self-isolating into digital worlds. As Marie-Louise von Franz predicted in the 1960s, the Puer Aeternus problem has spread across the world, and she was right. The educational system compounds the crisis. Male K-12 teachers have dropped from 33% in the 1980s to just 24% today, and only 3% in kindergarten and early years. Boys are expelled at 3 times the rate of girls, suspended twice as often, and 67% of special education students are male. Meanwhile, male college enrollment has dropped to just 41% of post-secondary students, the lowest ever. For the first time in American history, boys are 50% less likely than girls to meet basic proficiency in reading, math, and science globally. The system is designed for female learning styles: sit still, be quiet, focus on abstract concepts, prioritize compliance over exploration. Boys, with their need for physical movement, hands-on learning, competition, and clear hierarchical structures, are diagnosed as defective and medicated into submission. Then we wonder why they withdraw into video games where they can finally feel competent, needed, and victorious. The Puer lives provisionally. His current job isn't his real career, that's coming later. This relationship isn't quite right. The perfect woman is still out there. This apartment is temporary. Everything is temporary, because he's waiting for his real life to start. Jung called this the modern European disease of the merely imaginary life, and it's metastasized into American culture. 1/3 of young adults ages 18 to 34 live with their parents, with men significantly more likely than women, 36% versus 30%. Among those 30 to 34, 15.5% of men still live at home versus just 8.8% of women. This isn't purely economic, though crushing student debt, average $20,900 for Gen Z, up 13% from millennials, and impossible housing costs, median mortgage payment at all-time highs around $2,800 a month, certainly contribute. It's psychological, the refusal to commit to the limitations of adult reality. The Puer anticipates suffering to avoid suffering, which is actually a refusal to live, as von Franz wrote. He gets stuck in reflective hyperconsciousness, a self-created bubble which isolates him from life. He may become megalomaniacal, thinking of himself as someone special, a hidden genius, an artist without art. His great potential remains forever potential, because actualizing it would require the death of his grandiose fantasy self and acceptance of being a limited, ordinary man doing limited, ordinary work in the actual world. This pattern destroys careers. Research on developmental maturity shows early maturing males earn roughly 8% more than late maturers, net of height and attractiveness. Men reach peak earnings of $101,200 at age 55, but those stuck in Puer patterns plateau decades earlier. Being productive and resourceful is critical for a man's self-image and social standing. Men who lose jobs are 2 to 3 times more likely to die by suicide in the subsequent year. Employment isn't just about money, it's about identity, purpose, and membership in adult male community. Women are increasingly opting out of dating entirely, and the numbers are stark. 62% of single women are not looking to date at all versus just 37% of men. Women swipe right only 30% of the time on dating apps, and women find 80% of men on dating apps unattractive. Why? Not physical appearance, emotional immaturity. The research reveals that women have become 23% less likely to want to date than men because they feel they've invested too much emotional labor without support in return. Young women report shouldering disproportionate loads of invisible emotional labor, essentially parenting their partners. Men feel it's weird or like a waste of time opening up to male friends, so they reserve all vulnerability for women. Men consider this unburdening a natural part of relationships. Women describe it as exhausting work they're no longer willing to provide. 56% of women say it's hard to find someone who meets their expectations versus just 35% of men. Women report dating men who guilt-trip them, throw temper tantrums when denied, can't handle basic household tasks, expect women to manage their emotions, prioritize gaming over responsibilities, and show no initiative or follow-through. The eternal boy expects a partner to be his mother, soothing his anxiety, managing his life, solving his problems, while he contributes primarily neediness. This is deeply unsexy and increasingly non-negotiable. The economic factor intensifies the dynamic. Several women expressed concern that dating immature men affects their own economic futures, with young people struggling to find stable employment at unprecedented rates. The role of women as invisible drivers of men's success has taken a problematic new form. Women are being asked to financially support men who won't take responsibility for their own lives. From a Jungian perspective, this makes perfect sense. A man with an unintegrated mother complex unconsciously seeks his mother in every woman he meets. He wants the protecting, nourishing, charmed circle of the mother, the condition of the infant released from every care. No woman wants to be that for an adult man. Women want partners, not dependents. Men account for 80% of all suicides, despite being roughly 50% of the population. The male suicide rate stands at 22.8 per 100,000, compared to 5.9 for women, nearly 4 times higher. Roughly 100 men die by suicide every day in the United States, over 36,000 annually. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10-34. Here's what makes this particularly devastating. Most male suicides involve men with no known history of mental illness. Men self-report depression at much lower rates than women when asked using standard survey instruments, but when asked the same questions differently, trouble sleeping, low energy, irritability, men show much higher rates than women. The difference isn't biological, it's social. Men don't recognize or won't admit emotional distress because masculine norms equate vulnerability with weakness. Traditional masculinity literally kills. Research on 13,184 Australian men found that emotional suppression and stoicism dramatically increase suicide risk. Men who deviate from traditional masculine norms face backlash, mainly from other men, creating intense pressure to maintain the facade of invulnerability. The result? Men suffer in isolation, seek help far less frequently, and use more violent suicide methods, 60.7% firearms versus 35% for women. When they finally do ask for professional help, which most suicide victims do just before death, they're either not diagnosed or receive inadequate treatment. Add this to 15% of men having zero close friends, up fivefold since 1990, and you have a perfect storm: emotionally isolated men, forbidden by masculine norms from showing vulnerability, with no community to catch them when they fall, and neurological patterns that prefer fantasy to reality. The outcome is predictable and tragic. The Puer is fundamentally addicted to comfort, not physical comfort necessarily, but psychological safety, avoiding pain, challenge, failure, and the discomfort of genuine growth. This isn't weakness. It's a primitive fear response in the nervous system that screams, "I'm going to die," at any significant discomfort, even when rationally you know there's no actual threat. Comfort addiction creates the bank of no evidence problem. You haven't proved to yourself that you can handle difficulty because you've spent years avoiding it. Without building tolerance for discomfort, you can't develop resilience, which forms like a callus through repeated exposure. The more you stay in your comfort zone, the more fear intensifies, limiting growth and shrinking your life. Neuroscience shows the brain's default assumption is that control is not present. Control must be learned, but it's unlearned with prolonged avoidance of aversive situations. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you're training your nervous system that you cannot handle stress. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Less exposure to stress equals less stress tolerance, equals more avoidance, equals even less tolerance. The Puer pattern particularly manifests here because the eternal boy expects problems to be solved for him, typically by mother or a mother substitute. Learned helplessness research reveals that males are more susceptible than females. Most males exposed to uncontrollable stress did not learn to escape, while most females did learn to escape regardless of controllability. Males show increased helplessness behavior even without prior stress exposure. This likely stems from childhood patterns where caregivers either do everything for the boy or abandon him entirely, neither teaching him that his efforts produce results. Breaking this requires systematically expanding your distress tolerance through progressive challenge, cold showers, heavy deadlifts, difficult conversations, financial discipline. Each small victory deposits evidence in your psychological account that you can handle hard things. This bank of evidence eventually outweighs the primitive fear response, allowing genuine transformation. Jung was clear. There's no shortcut to individuation, the process of becoming a mature, individuated self. It requires confronting your shadow, all the parts of yourself you've disowned and projected onto others. For men, this typically includes aggression, selfishness, weakness, incompetence, and the needy, vulnerable child within. If you get rid of qualities you don't like by denying them, Jung wrote, you become more and more unaware of what you are, and your devils will grow fatter and fatter. Shadow work for men starts with radical honesty. Track your emotional reactions. What bothers you in other men likely exists within you. Journal on difficult questions. What anger am I holding unexpressed? How do I define success? Is it actually mine or my father's? Where am I playing small to avoid responsibility? What would I do if I weren't afraid of failure? The 3-2-1 shadow process works powerfully. Identify someone who triggers you. Describe them in third person. Talk to them in second person. Then become them in first person. I am arrogant. I am dismissive. Integration happens when you can own these qualities in yourself without judgment. The transformation path requires embodiment. The Puer lives in his head. The mature masculine man lives in his body. Physical training isn't optional. It's the vehicle for psychological transformation. Daily exercise, strength training 3 times weekly, progressive challenge, and competition ground you in reality where results are objective and immediate. Every kept commitment to work out despite not feeling like it builds self-esteem and shifts your identity from someone who quits to someone who follows through. The body leads, the mind follows. Community is non-negotiable. You cannot do this alone. The Mankind Project has initiated over 70,000 men through their new warrior training adventure, a weekend intensive that serves as modern initiation. Research validates significant improvements in depression, life satisfaction, and emotional regulation. After the weekend, men join free weekly I groups, peer-facilitated men's circles, in 20-plus countries. Other options include everyman retreats, local men's groups, or forming your own. The key is regular, authentic connection with other men committed to growth, who will both support and challenge you. Financial maturity runs parallel to psychological maturity. Track every expense for 30 days. Most men in Puer patterns avoid looking at reality. Build a $1,000 emergency fund immediately, then 3 to 6 months of expenses. Use the debt snowball method. Pay smallest debts first for psychological wins, or avalanche, highest interest first for math optimization. Budget using 50-30-20, 50% needs, 30% wants, 20% savings and debt reduction. Increase income through skill development. The psychological shift from scarcity to abundance mindset, from instant gratification to delayed gratification, mirrors the shift from pure to mature masculine. Relationship readiness requires attachment healing. Identify your style. Anxious, common in Puer. Fear abandonment, need reassurance. Avoidant, common with father wounds. Uncomfortable with closeness. Secure or disorganized. Anxious attachment heals through self-soothing practice, building independence, and therapy for abandonment fears. Avoidant attachment heals through vulnerability practice, staying present when intimacy increases, and challenging the independence myth. Learn nonviolent communication. Observation plus feeling plus need plus request, not blame and demands. Practice boundaries. State needs clearly. Enforce consistently. Don't apologize for having limits. Most crucially, confront the mother and father complexes directly. This typically requires therapy with a Jungian analyst or someone trained in complex work. The goal isn't to eliminate these complexes, they're never fully resolved, but to depotentiate them, reducing their unconscious control over your life. You must recognize where you're projecting parental expectations onto partners, bosses, and authorities, and take back those projections. The work is difficult, ongoing, and non-negotiable for mature masculine development. Let's be clear about what's at stake. If you remain in the Puer pattern, the data predicts your future with grim accuracy. You'll earn 8 to 33% less over your lifetime than men who mature on schedule. You face 4 times higher suicide risk and dramatically elevated rates of depression and anxiety. You'll be rejected by 80% of potential partners on dating markets, and 62% of single women won't even be looking because they're exhausted by men exactly like you. You'll likely remain socially isolated, with few to no close friendships, and you'll die earlier from preventable health conditions linked to loneliness and chronic stress. Your unrealized potential, that fantasy of the great man you could become, will remain fantasy precisely because you refuse to kill it and become an ordinary man doing ordinary work extraordinarily well. Jung's concept of the self, psychological wholeness, requires death and rebirth. The Puer must die for the mature masculine to emerge. But here's the flip side. Transformation is possible. Your brain remains neuroplastic. The shadow can be integrated. The complexes can be confronted. Initiation can happen through intentional practice and community. Men in their 30s, 40s, even 50s have successfully made this transition, stepping into careers that matter, relationships that sustain, purpose that drives, and community that holds them. They describe it as finally feeling real, finally showing up in their own lives, finally being men their fathers never taught them to be. The work is hard. It requires confronting everything you've avoided. It means feeling the grief of lost years and accepting you cannot go back. It demands daily discipline, regular discomfort, honest community, and killing the fantasy self you've cherished. But the alternative, drifting into middle age, stuck in provisional adolescence, alone, resentful, and wondering where your life went, is infinitely worse. The wound that creates the Puer is not your fault. The cultural collapse, absent fathers, failed institutions, economic pressures, none of that is your doing. But your healing is your responsibility. No one is coming to save you. Not your mother, not the perfect woman, not the perfect job, not more time. The life you're waiting for will never start until you step into it, exactly as it is, exactly as you are, and begin the hard, unglamorous work of growing up. Jung wrote that individuation is nothing less than divesting yourself of false wrappings and becoming your own self. Von Franz was even blunter. To cure the neurosis of the pure, one has to work. This is the most disagreeable word for a pure. She then offered Jung's guidance. If you always do the next thing that needs to be done, you will go most safely and sure-footedly along the path prescribed by your unconscious. The next thing that needs to be done is staring you in the face. You know what it is. The only question is whether you'll finally do it.